Welcome to episode 15 of Libero. I'm Jonathan Wilson, and I'm joined today by Miguel Delaney of The Independent and John Brewin, who flies under his own flag. Today we'll be looking at hipsterism in the second half, but before that we're going to be dealing with Champions League semi-finals. So we should say we're recording this before the PSG-Arsenal game, but after Inter v Barcelona. And Inter Barcelona last night was just one of the most incredible games I think I've ever seen. John?
Yeah, no doubt about that. Incredible drama, incredible, let's use that word, narratives all over the show. Happenings, some hard luck stories. The look on Lewandowski's face at the end, he suddenly looked, I say this as someone who's older than him, but he suddenly looked very old. Like, he suddenly looked like, one of those Hollywood actors that goes from being brat pack, heartthrob, to sort of older man playing the family man type of. He suddenly looked like that, like a sort of gear at 50 sort of thing, And the rest of beyond that, you had the first leg was all about Lamine Yamal, but we forgot that it was actually 3-3. And if you watch the end of that first leg, you would see that the Barcelona players were the more disappointed after the first leg.
And, well, rightly so. I mean, in any rational world, maybe less so now that the away goals rule doesn't exist, but the away team draws 3-3.
Yeah,
they're the ones who should be happy. So the fact, I know there's a lot of mockery of the fact that Denzel Dumfries got man of the match in that first game, but he probably was the best player of the two legs, Miguel.
It feels slightly granular to concentrate on one individuals like that when we're talking about the epic scale of this match. And just to go back, I think, because what really stood out about for me, and I think there's a bigger argument that we're going to get into, I suppose, about how semi-finals, Champions League semi-finals produced this more than anything else. And there's a long, long list of ties that have an argument to be the greatest semi-final ever for all sorts of reasons. But I felt what was so remarkable about this, and maybe this is where Dumfries' performance was so almost distilled it or kind of symbolised this. It never let up. The only period of, say, lull or I wouldn't even say drift, obviously, but the only thing approaching that I can think of was in the spell between Olmo's equaliser, which was a brilliant header for one, and then Rafinha's volley to make it 3-2, again, a brilliant delivery. That was another element that elevated the sheer quality of the goals. And in that period, it did look like Inter were done. But now, you're almost recasting that. It wasn't they were done. It was they were in something else that kind of makes great sport. They were hanging on in there, really kind of old-fashioned defending. And I suppose this is where kind of Dumfries' point comes in, that it was obviously his kind of match-changing goals, but equally kind of the discipline. He are one of many Inter players that display that discipline that was so necessary to put them where they are.
They're only ever behind, weren't they?
Yeah.
This is it. It's Barcelona are painted as like this hard luck story, but it was actually them trying to pull their way back into the tie throughout the tie. That's what it made it so unique, I suppose, is that you're being pulled in different emotional reactions than the normal games. Let's start on this. Why are semi-finals better than finals? Well, I think this actually goes to the good old FA Cup. Until we had FA Cup semi-finals at Wembley, semi-final day in the FA Cup was a gala day in English football. The semi-finals are always better than the actual final. And those... But then again, you introduce the two-legged thing of the classic European tie, and you're going back to the 50s, going back to, Manchester United, Real Madrid in, 56, 57, throughout European football history, those games have always been unbelievable. But does this one top the lot? We're operating in recency bias, aren't we? But it was certainly one where you wanted to read all the match reports the next morning, which is at the mark these days of a very good game.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that was so striking last night, and maybe this isn't necessarily specific to semi-finals, but it was a little bit like Rory McIlroy on the final day of the Masters. The thing that made it great was football recently, and I know this is a wider discussion, I don't particularly want to get into this discussion, but football recently has aimed at control. It's been about reducing risk in a sport that contains more risk than almost any other sport, or any other team sport. It's about reducing that as far as possible. And yet what you see is the best sport, the most emotionally engaging sport, is when there's imperfection there. And I think this is a pretty flawed Interside in many ways. I think they look knackered at points of that game, absolutely exhausted. They end up, the equaliser to make it 3-3 last night. The Acerbi, a centre-back shouldn't be there. He's been chucked forward. The finish is ridiculous. That's the finish.
Shearer,
It's a finish of the best centre-forward you've ever seen. Ghosting across the near post, slamming it in. It's really hard to do. And the centre-back shouldn't be doing that. But then you've also got this Barcelona who have this great beauty. They have Lamine Yamal, they have Rafinha, some brilliant passes in the midfield. But they've got this incredible fragility because they play bonkersly high line, and they back it up not with Ter Stegen because he's injured, but with a chain-smoking bloke who retired a couple of years ago.
And there was a desperation as well. You go back to Lamine, there was a point where Barcelona were just like, how are we going to get out of this? Just give it to the 17-year-old. When you've got a group of international stars in that team. Or nascent international stars that were just like, our only route back in is to just give it to this kid, which shows already that the level that he's at or the level he's operating at the moment. But and Inter were just sort of treble teaming, and that adds that extra bit, and I suppose it allows other players to come into the game. That it created space in the game for others to start, and it's interesting, isn't it? You're almost back to, let's go Wilson era. It's almost the Lamine semi-final, but it's the Matthews final, but it's like you've got Denzel Dumfries in the Stan Mortensen role, haven't you? Because it's like actually the decisive player was this sort of quite decent Dutch player who's a sort of a bits and pieces player, as Fred Truman might call him.
But at least Stan Mortensen was on the same team as Stanley Matthews.
Yeah, exactly. But that shows you the madness of this tie.
Yeah,
is that it will be remembered for the performance of a player that ended up on the losing side.
But it's
incredible.
That sort of almost adds to it as well, because now it's already created this kind of now a narrative drive about Yamal's career. Would have been quite boring if by the age of 17,
it won a lot.
He's won a European Championship and a Champions League, and there's a World Cup to come next summer. But
so now, Miguel, we've got the quest to make it by 18. Yeah,
just on the two flawed teams point. The one thing we can't get away from this really. What was the main factor in this tie being so special? Well, you'd have to say it's Hansi Flick just deciding to.
Amazing. I love the guy.
It's
incredible. Like sort of Jimmy White at snooker or something, isn't it? It's just like just throw caution to the wind, and listen, Bayern Munich by definition, and probably not since. Even in the 70s when they were the best, have never been an exciting team to watch, just by the fact that it's... But he made Bayern briefly brilliant to watch, and he's done it again with Barcelona, but it's just that risk factor of just fuck it, just go for it. And it is amazing to watch.
It does feel, though, that this is... It's sort of a bit like the pressing of 10 years ago. It's like, he went off to international football, and he hasn't quite noticed that other people have just started to calm down a bit. And it's that thing. Germany took so long to adopt pressing, and then they suddenly do around about 2000. Ralph Rangnick had tried to explain it on TV, and be like, who's this weird boffin? And then Klopp does it and has charisma. 2006 World Cup and Klinsmann and Jogi Löw, and suddenly everybody in Germany is pressing with the zeal of a convert. Well, Flick is still in that sort of first evangelical wave of pressing, and he hasn't noticed that people have sort of go, I don't know if that's maybe a bit too much. Even in the first leg, there was times when you sort of thought they're so high. Or it's a bit. The thing it reminded me of was Tottenham defending with 9 men against Chelsea in Ange's 11th game. Just knock it back and then knock it forward again, and somebody makes a run, or play a little diagonal over the top. And you do sort of think that had Barca got to that final, and so we're doing this before the other semi is complete. So if we've been playing against Arsenal, Nicolas Javert would have eaten them up on set plays. If we've been playing PSG, Kvaratskhelia on one flank, Dewar on the other, running into all that space behind the fullbacks. I mean, it's academic now, but I don't see how Barca could have won that final
unless they bring it down to outscoring them. which is I know something to be celebrated. Unfortunately, it often leads to not celebrating with victory. Just because, but what was incredible? There were some periods last night where, especially in the first half, actually, where within 2 passes, suddenly there was yet another moment where Inter were bearing down on goal. I'm like, there was one incredible save from Szczesny that really shouldn't have been possible. It was a brilliant piece of goalkeeping from a recent retiree.
So we mentioned that. Go on.
So on that exact point, I suppose the reason, I suppose, why we have so many memorable semi-finals and so many forgettable finals. And there's obviously other kind of modern Champions League factors, the way football's going. But is it also, at the core of it, is it something as simple as, in a final, you've got something to lose, and in a semi-final, you've got something to gain? There's a difference between on the stage and being on the brink of the stage.
Yeah, I think there's a truth to that. I think that there's something about two-legged games. I don't know. It somehow expands the possibilities of what can happen in a game way beyond what it should. You've seen games where a team can be 3 goals down with 10 minutes of second leg to go, and you sort of still think, well, they could do it. There's a chance here that the momentum shifts somehow seem bigger. Maybe that's to do with partisan support. I don't know. I think you're right that the nature of a final, everything's different. Your preparation's different. All the media you've got to do beforehand. It's sort of stuck out at the end of a season, so you might have had a 2 or 3 week break from the end of your domestic season, and then how you deal with that's a huge factor. And you look back at sort of the great Liverpool team. I think in '84 they went to Tel Aviv and got absolutely hammered, didn't they? And a load of them got arrested for smashing a shop window or something, and all got hushed up. Liverpool players so drunk they're fighting in the street. Clough took his Forest team off to Mallorca and banned them from doing exercise for a week. So you had John McGovern getting up before dawn to go for his 6K run along the beach, so Clough wouldn't see him. And then you'd also have the opposite of that. So Inter back in '67 going in this sort of retiro where they didn't see anybody who wasn't a member of the team for sort of a week before the final and going sort of slowly mad under that pressure. I just think the context of finals, quite apart from the sense of just being so close to the line, that context makes everything very different and very unsettling and much harder for teams to reach their normal levels.
You also see some sort of weird selections, don't you, often in finals where managers have had too long to think of it, or they risk players that clearly aren't fit. Remember Diego Costa in the 2014...
Harry Kane in 2019.
And Ferguson selection in '99, where he'd obviously... a couple of players suspended and he just messed it up, but got away with it.
Rodri
and the big one, given Rodri's status now, to think that just Incredible. 4 years ago, Guardiola leaves him out.
But, listen, none of us have the football genius of Pep Guardiola, but our messages that night were like, "What is he doing here?"
Well, and
that was a statement, wasn't it? So that was Pep Guardiola trying. We just don't want to win it. We want to win it with style.
But there is that story as well. Like when Tuchel was on the bus with Chelsea on the way to the final, and the news came true that he wasn't playing Rodri or Fernandinho, and Tuchel was there. This is incredible. Like what is he doing?
Yeah. So the final can scramble a coach's mind and those of the players. Where I suppose a semi-final comes where in between league fixtures where you've got to play. I mean, Inter still have something to play for, so do Barcelona. And it's just, we're here. I know we've got to play, and that made that such a. Imagine how those players feel on both sides after a game like that. And I remember being, go back to Man United after the Juventus game. I went to the game after that. It was a game against Sheffield Wednesday. They won 3-0 very easily. But the whole vibe, the whole day is, well, what about Wednesday? The game that happened on Wednesday rather than Sheffield Wednesday, because it was just, we can't believe that United were involved in a game like that. The Keane, the Scholes, Dwight York, Andy Cole, just incredible game. That it's one of those things where that game could probably take the air out of the rest of the season, couldn't it, for both teams, having been involved in it, because it was just an incredible emotional level. And yet again, that may be another reason that saps it out when you get to the final. It's like, once you've played a game like that, how do you better it? How do you arrive at the same levels?
I wonder as well if the way that finals are set up now, the having your 15-minute concert beforehand, and
oh, here he is. He always whinges about this.
I just don't get the point of it.
But he's whinged about this for the last 20 years. Let's be fair.
I mean, they had, before 2009, they had Andrea Bocelli singing Nessun Dorma or the Gladiator theme or something on the pitch. That was fine. That's enough. That's going to fit the occasion. Since then, like Imagine Dragons and all this bollocks. We were actually at a meeting with UEFA last month, and we were discussing this. And like the question from a lot of the journalists was, who's actually asking for this? Who wants it?
So you said like the halftime show, though. This is something
But see, that's actually genuinely going to, I think, could potentially have a huge impact on the World Cup final. So they're talking about it being 25 minutes long now, aren't they? So suddenly you've had football, which for many years halftime was 10 minutes, then it became 15 minutes, and now it's
is it going to
one
be
game.
Kid Rock? Because
isn't it a selection of people put together by Coldplay? I think it's multiple artists.
Wow. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, it's hardly like Prince or Tom Petty in the Heartbreakers or whatever used to be at the Super Bowl, which seems to fly by, or Bruce or whatever. Anyway, but yeah, but Jonathan, you have whinged about these things as long as I've known you.
I just don't see what it's for. It costs a huge amount of money. It's massively disruptive. It affects the atmosphere in the stadiums. Often in the stadium, so sometimes in the stadium, for some reason, it seems to connect with people, and people sort of are quite happy, or they sing along or whatever. Most of the time, fans are trying to sing over the top of it. So, I mean, in Paris in 2022, Liverpool fans singing over the top of.
Well, you weren't Camilla Cabello.
Camilla Cabello.
She complained about it. The fans were singing their own songs. Well, yes, love.
Take it back to the days of a brass band and Abide With Me, and off we go. That's what we say.
Bruce Forsyth in 1974 FA Cup final. He was a showman. He knew how to get the. Have you seen that? It's an incredible bit. It's on YouTube.
Yeah,
astonishing how he just plays for the crowd. The crowd are completely up for it. It's kind of he's the greatest showman of the 20th century, Bruce Forsyth. And with that thought, let's bring the first half to an end. And we'll be back after the break to talk about hipsterism, which probably will not include Bruce Forsyth.
Welcome back to Libero episode 15. I'm here, of course, with Jonathan Wilson and Miguel Delaney. And we've got an email from Mexico City. So Libero is going global. And it's from Ricardo Lopez Cordero. And he says, greetings from probably your only Mexican listener. Well, we hope not, Ricardo. We hope you're spreading the word. I've been really enjoying the pod. I'm glad it exists. Well, there you go. But let's not stop there. He's got plenty more to say. He said, here's a thought. I'd love to hear a Libero episode on hipster football. I grew up in that world. Tribute to Sam Paoli, stacks of Panenka magazine, Wilson's books, I know what it means by that, obscure Swedish clubs, supporting a third-tier side, cheering on Latin American players in Scotland, Loco Abru's endless journey, Guardiola playing in Cineola under Lillo. Wow. I mean, that's a fairly comprehensive list of hipsterism, some of which, I've got to say, I've never heard of. But there you go. I'm especially interested in the obsession with authenticity often became exoticism or ironic detachment. Retro shirts going for hundreds of pounds. It's true, actually. I live not far from the retro football shop, and I saw the price of a PSG shirt in there. Good Lord above. Carefully curated social media shots of off-the-beaten-track pitches. Moustaches, the moustaches come back, hasn't it? Maybe the romanticism got swallowed up by the machine, or maybe it mattered. So this appears that Ricardo has is kicking back against the hipster thing.
Well, can we define what hipsterism is before we start talking about it? So, when do we think it began in football, and what does it actually mean?
Okay, well, I have a few thoughts on this actually, and I think there are a couple of categories, and I suppose you've got the intellectual side of it, I suppose, let's call it that, intellectual, which is, and it's an internationalist thing, isn't it? You look beyond your own borders. So, I mean, and that, listen, that has gone on since the days of World Soccer magazine at the beginning, and certainly it was a big thing in the 1980s, and then the 1990s began with whether he sort of decried a bit, but I think Nick Hornby spoke to a certain generation of football fans. There was Simon Cooper, of course, in his Football Against the Enemy, which was that an international-looking thing. When Saturday Comes, which has been around since the mid-'80s, and I've been a long-time reader of, also had that international aspect of it. But then you've also got the fashion aspect of it, that football, at various times, and remains part of the fashion and youth culture. And I was thinking about this the other day, that there was if it became part briefly of, and may still be, of gay culture. In fact, I used to have a couple of friends that I saw them, they were wearing Hackett shirts, and I was like, what are you you're off down watching Millwall or something like that? And they were telling me that actually at that point the scally lad was quite something to aspire to, that look on that scene. So there you go. So I mean, football has spread.
Didn't we see shots from a Met Gala this week of is she called Rosalia wearing football boots?
She's wearing football studs, yeah. And football studs presumably okay on the carpet, but once you get onto the proper floor, it might be a bit of a problem. So you've got this international outlook, this cool thing, and you've also got Wilson books.
They're also an international cool thing.
Look, we're getting here. How much is Wilson himself, almost the founder of modern football hipsterism? not necessarily that he wanted to be, an unwitting. Yeah. Including in 37-degree heat in Samara as I walked behind him, and he was still wearing his geography teacher's jacket and pumping sweat.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't wearing cargo shorts.
He'd be wearing the same in Alaska as well. That's the thing. So he wears the same sort of uniform. But I'll say this. I first came across Jonathan's work before I knew Jonathan. I read his Eastern European book, which is very good, and thought, there's someone who has the same outlook as I do, which is looking beyond the Premier League, the Football League of the time, and looking to see what else is out there. And I think you were probably following in something of a tradition there, Jonathan. I think that's fair to say.
I mean, I don't think that book could have happened without Simon Cooper's I think Football Against the Enemy.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's the three books in the early 90s that really opened doors. And maybe related to this topic. So you have All Played Out by Pete Davis, comes out in 91.
Of course, yeah, brilliant
He's
book.
been embedded with England at the 1990 World Cup.
Which could never be done now.
Oh, no. But it's a brilliant book, not just on what he sees in the camp, but sort of his reflections on the culture of it, on fans and on Italy. I think Italian 90 is a huge gateway for a lot of people.
Yes, because Italy has... There was the fashion aspects of it as well, right? The hooliganism and the fact that sort of clashed in Italy, and the fact that the Italian football of that era was so cool. I mean, the Italian football of that era is the first time that footballers were used essentially as advertising motifs, weren't they? Global blue chip brands were advertising in Italian football.
Well, then this is also where the intellectualism, I think, comes in. That World Cup, I think, probably in terms of the actual football played, the worst of all the World Cups. And yet it had these great operatic narratives, this incredible drama. The 7 or 8 countries have massive stories around that World Cup. So England do in this sort of Gazza's tears, getting to the semi-final, some kind of post-hooligan or coming to the end of hooligan redemption, leads to massive middle-class support. You look at Ian Hamilton, the poet, writes a book on Gaza off the back of it. You've got Carl Miller in the LRB writing this extraordinary sort of almost a homoerotic sort of tribute to Gaza. That's the first time I think sort of that sort of intellectual has really paid football proper attention. Yeah, that's a huge tournament for Ireland. It's a huge tournament for Cameroon. It's a huge tournament. West Germany's last ever tournament, Yugoslavia's last ever tournament, the Soviet Union's last ever tournament. You've got the whole Argentinian psychodrama. You've got Italy, sort of the designated champions, sort of collapsing in the semi-final. It's an amazing sort of dramatic event. It's not great football, But it sort of, in a whole load of different countries, it catapults football right into the front of the consciousness just at the time satellite TV is about to take off. And I think, would the Premier League have happened without Italian United? Well, probably, but would it have happened in the same way? No, I don't think it would. So I mentioned the three books. Pete Davis, the first one, Fever Pitch, Nick Hornby's book in 1992, the second, and then Football Against the Enemy by Simon Cooper in 1994. They're the three that sort of, they're opening the doors to sort of the kind of books I've been able to write, and to a whole lot more.
So Miguel, you're a little bit younger than Jonathan and myself, and you would probably be reading those same book as well, but a little later, weren't you? Like they were text by the time you probably came to.
That is true, especially. Yeah. So when I was in university in the early 2000s, and you're kind of like, and I did journalism, and yes, I wanted to become a football journalist, and you're starting to read all these, and it's exactly that. It's almost kind of these early lists of. The kind of the football books you have to read. And very early on I read Football Against the Enemy and All Played Out. I can remember, on the way into university. Having books at that point. Now I'm very much a Kindle man. But that's exactly, and it did. But also, I mean, I think it's funny actually. I reread All Played Out before I did my first tournament, which was Euro 2008. And I was kind of, I was working for an Irish newspaper at the time, but I was on a kind of I wasn't staff. So I sort of like half paid my own way to year 2008. And I do remember thinking as a journalist in that sense, kind of the way All Played Out kind of conjured the image of like the actual, and like this, without making this pod too self-indulgent, that's part of it.
That's just one of the it's gone.
One of the beauties of the job actually is doing a tournament and going to another country and the kind of that sense of discovery of immersing yourself for a while. I'm in Paris at the moment for the Arsenal game, and I was even thinking about it this morning as I stepped out of the hotel to get breakfast this morning, like reminding me of Euro 2016 a little bit. And all Played Out was just the kind of the picture painted of that, kind of travelling around Italy, the kind of just the atmosphere of an event like that.
Well, we met for the first time in 2008, didn't we? Didn't we meet just before the semi or the final in Vienna?
No, it was a bit earlier. I think it was in one of the group games. I remember it was in the Basel. Remember Basel had that massive structure.
Oh, the like the sports hall over the road, yeah. But we had that very good night out in Vienna where we were sort of. I remember sort of sitting by a canal watching the dawn come up, thinking, "Oh shit, I've got a bit of game in about 12 hours."
I think the glory days,
I think we're the glory days. But that actually touches on something else which I think is significant to the international aspect, which is the internet. That we suddenly have access, suddenly, but I mean, gradually through the 90s, you get increasing access to foreign football cultures. I think that had already been seeded, certainly in my case, by two things. So one was computer games, so Sensible World of Soccer, and suddenly you have all these teams you never heard of, all these players you never heard of. But also, even slightly earlier than that, Sabutio. And I used to love just reading the Sabutio catalogue.
And the different colour of kits. Or I had the scoreboard, like as you say, all these incredible names. Well, I wonder, just to pick up on your point in the internet, is this, I mean, especially as foreign football becomes more general, so you've got like in the UK and Ireland, you've got Serie A on Channel 4. Sky, by the late 90s, is showing Spanish football. And the internet obviously kind of like democratized this to some degree. So true hipsterism actually has to become narrower and narrower than just pure. Yeah. I think that's
probably more obscure. You mean?
I mean, the thing is that sort of football hipsterism is mocked, isn't it, by Half Man Half Biscuits? All I want for Christmas is a Dukla Prague away kit, which from like 1983 or something. So this stuff had existed before because you'd had foreign. Okay, when English teams played away in Europe, a lot of the fashions came from. Well, let's say some of the products arrived by ill-gotten means back to Manchester and Liverpool and created a fashion movement, so that everyone had to have this sort of the casual gear was this very expensive foreign, so you
expensive and yet in some ways strangely free.
It depends who you bought it from, I suppose. But that movement, the casual movement, introduced this sort of cool aspect to it. But also that interest in foreign teams and foreign football and the exoticism of it, which I suppose was created by the European trophies actually existing.
Well, and then the floodlit friendlies and some of the tours before that. If you look at Dynamo Moscow's tour of the UK in 1945, they got massive crowds because people were just so excited to see a foreign team. You look at the crowds who turned up for Wolves' floodlit friendlies in 54, which is what is the final trigger for the creation of the European Cup. But it's you're absolutely right. The European competitions sort of spread that and sort of give it a structure. But the desire to see foreign teams predates that. They're a result of that desire rather than the desire being a result of the competition.
Yeah, and you have bands named after. I mean, Saint Etienne, obviously named after this very cool French team of the 1970s. They're like a late 80s, early 90s band, and there's a Liverpool band called Pele. And football around that era became cool, and you were able to talk about it in like music circles and things like that. And then I suppose what's happened now is it's become big business. And so what Miguel talks about there is the hipsterism is now going down the very indie thing. So you've got people writing a book about a year in the life of Rayo Vallecano or whatever, and it becomes, by its nature, a little bit more obscure. Jonathan, you wrote a book about football tactics, famously, Inverting the Pyramid.
Yeah, sorry.
But this has bred its own subculture to the point that you don't understand it. You're like deep thought in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You've got the answer 42, and these people have gone out to find out.
42, 442, John.
Right, yes, well, there you go. But you see, the people have gone out to find out what you actually meant, and it's an incredible, like, there is a whole world, and, you've been involved in this debate over relationism versus positionalism, is this correct?
I don't know. The thing that gets me with this
is that stuff hip, I suppose, is the first question.
Well, I got pigeonholed as a tactics writer because of that book, but it's not really a book about tactics. It's a book about tacticians.
Right.
So my interest is way more in the social and political context that creates styles of play, the people who create the style of play, the precise detail of the pitch. I'm not saying it's not important. It clearly is hugely important. I'm not good enough while watching a game to see that. And some of the bloggers who write in tactics are. I think a lot of them are bluffing. But I was never doing that style of thing.
There we go. That's been cut out for socials.
There's the money shot, yeah.
Just in that, one thing we should acknowledge as well is that the hipsterism became such a kind of a widely used term, and this is probably more about a decade ago, that it kind of swung back the other way a bit, that suddenly almost anything marginally out there was considered, like, people. There was a point where people were describing the Classico as hipster, like just two of the biggest clubs in the world.
Well, we were at the Super Classico Libertadores final, which didn't happen.
Yeah.
Weirdly, as we're seeing the stories we're writing of so the people who don't know what happened. When was it? 2018.
Yeah, November 2018. Yeah.
The Boca bus pulling up at Rivers Ground for the second leg had been 2-2 in the first leg. The Boca bus is attacked. Police fire tear gas and pepper spray. The players are affected. They end up not being able to play. And this story is slowly breaking through the afternoon and evening. And we're seeing the stories we're writing getting incredible numbers on the websites we're writing for. So at one point, 5 of the Guardian's top 10 most read stories in sport were stuff I'd filed on that game just as it was happening. So the idea there was no appetite for this.
I was doing the live blog, Jonathan, which was pumping out even more. It was huge. We're getting like 1 million clicks or something on this.
The appetite for it was huge. Yet at the same time on Twitter, we're getting derided by people going, "Oh, why have they gone out to this obscure game? Nobody cares." Well, they clearly do care. So that seemed to me the sort of a high point or the low point of the sort of hipster culture wars. And I didn't really understand it because as far as I saw it, I was just reporting on a really interesting, important story that other people cared about.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is that division, isn't it? I suppose, something this week, you've seen this like rather weird bromance between Pep Guardiola, who is, I suppose, a father figure amongst football hipsters, really, for actually introducing a style of play that is, I think, universally approved of within that sort of community. and this weird thing that he's got with Neil Warnock. Yeah. So that Neil Warnock has become this almost like ironically championed guy amongst him. Warnock is playing along with it quite happily, of course. He's got to hang out with Manchester City's players and, hang out with Pep. And it's this, and it feels to me that like there is a part of any of these fashionable movements is that there is a kick against it and it goes the other way. And like the English football man is now sort of coming back into fashion as the Neil Warnock, having been, actually it's fair to say, a much derided figure during the majority of his career, despite his many successes, is now this sort of godhead of, oh, this is a real football man. And it seems to switch from one thing to the other, doesn't it?
But the irony of that is that Guardiola and Warnock actually have quite a lot in common. They both hate risk. They both demand control. They achieve that in different ways because they work with totally different levels of players.
Yes.
But a lot of their core principles, I think, are actually pretty much the same. I can completely understand how they could get in a conversation and they would hate the same things that players do that annoy them. Players who go off piece, players who play sort of reckless passes that cost possession. They would both hate that. So, I think we saw that with Guardiola's switch to the four centre-backs across the back and you go in full Pulis. Well, actually, if you think about it, it's not that bizarre because Tony Pulis, like Neil Warnock, like Guardiola, control is everything. How do you best achieve that? Well, they achieve it in different ways because they come from different cultures and because they're working with a different type of squad.
So I mean, and there's obviously.
So just to point out, our discussion on hipsterism has come back around to Neil Warnock.
Well, yeah, but this is what I'm talking about. Is that there is this football is a cyclical thing. I suppose one of the aspects actually, and we were talking about, the chaps were talking about on the previous pod, is that access to foreign football is not quite what it was at the moment in.
That's true.
In England, if you want to watch Ligue 1, you've got to pay for a subscription. If you want to watch La Liga, the same. Serie A is only barely available, and Bundesliga coverage is quite minimal.
The one thing I would say about that, though, is, to be fair, like obviously, as I was growing up, you're so dependent on Eurogol, say, on a Monday night on Eurosport. Whereas now, even if you can't watch La Liga or League One as easily as you could 15 years ago, you can still just type in, not always legally, just type in, you hear about some goal online, oh, let's have a look at this, type it in, and you can see it. And that you have all this just available at your fingertips. And
there's also, I mean, this is not really to do with hipsterism, but in terms of the popularity of those footballs, 15 years ago, Spanish league football was clearly the best in the world. You had this extraordinary rivalry between Guardiola and Mourinho at Barcelona and Real Madrid. Everybody was desperate to see those games. I don't know what the cause and effect is. Are fewer people watching it because it's not on Sky? Was it not on Sky because fewer people are watching it? And I think there's a real sense now that the Premier League is obviously the best football in the world. And so people who just want to watch the best football now watch the Premier League. Whereas previously they'd have been, in the 90s it would have been Serie A. In the 2000s up to, I don't know when it changes, 17, 18, it was obviously Spain.
Well, I think part of the problem with that is that... Okay, and I know this from experience of working in a company that did these type of deals. Back, say, 15 years ago, it was quite easy to get Serie A on your channel for not very much money. And to also have a Premier League package, which would cost a fair amount, of course. Then came the point where Serie A and La Liga noticed that their incomings from TV and international were nothing like that of the Premier League, and started charging much bigger premiums to companies in the UK for the right to show their football, and at the same time as Premier League was hitting its top price, and so those channels decided that they could no longer afford the rates that they were being charged at, and so cast them aside, looking at the audience figures, which are actually, and have always been, very small for those foreign. They're nice to have, I think it's fair to say, in the TV industry, and decided that they could do without. Sky decided they could do without the Champions League and have operated perfectly happily since then. but got rid of Spanish football, which was a thing that we all enjoyed, but maybe not as many people enjoyed as you might have thought. And getting rid of Serie A or whatever, it doesn't really affect the bottom line. So because the Premier League has eaten up everything, and so you have all these rows with, Miguel's friend, Senor Tebas, is trying to find his way back to get onto that level playing field, but it's not possible with the all-conquering Premier League. I suppose one of the questions is, if you're a hipster, do you watch the Premier League? Is it hip enough these days? Is there enough there? Or
well, if you're a hipster, what you can do is say, once you get a Carlos Belibe, and you can expound.
I'm a believer. Yeah.
You've been following his career since he was 13, and you actually knew he was going to be as good as he is.
Okay. So there's that. Yes, because that was another strand of football hipsterism, was scouting.
Yeah.
There was a point where people on Twitter, we're going back 10 years or so, would say that they were a football scout. Now, I have a feeling that none of them were, getting in a Volvo and driving to Doncaster on a Tuesday night and watching a reserve game with a pen and pencil. They were actually just watching the internet. But
even then, were they actually watching it? I mean, the number of people who seem to spend all their lives watching Zweite Bundesliga and coming back with kind of, I saw him playing in that game for Paderborn, when they beat Mainz. No, you didn't. This is not true. Like, you've heard about that and you're pretending you watch all Zweite Bundesliga.
Well, I mean, it's the same with like music, hipsterism and film and all that type of thing, and fashion and all that. It's the same principle, isn't it? That you've always got to be ahead of that person. It's the same.
Well, yeah, exactly, and there is an element of kind of discovering this band first. And on exactly that, to get self-indulgent again. What was the discussion we were having after Spurs Bodo last week? Well, there's no sure sign of some foreign team about to plummet against the sheer force of the Barclays than podcast member Rory Smith writing a big deep dive on them.
This is the last you'll see of.
Yeah.
The single one he's got through is basically Kvaratskhelia.
The kiss of Smith. Yeah.
Rory Smith is sort
Smith
of the Grim Reaper going around just culling the hopes and dreams of overperforming medium-sized clubs.
Yeah.
and the thing is, I mean, like, I'm one of those people that, in fact, I'm doing this next week, is like to take in foreign football. I spent one weekend where I did 4 Dutch matches in 4 days. Absolutely fantastic.
Great country for Netherlands for that.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I got to see Arne Slot Feyenoord even before I knew who Arne Slot was. I've got to be honest about that. Or I knew that he'd been linked with the Spurs job, but I didn't know he was going to become Liverpool's manager at the time. And then next weekend I'm off to see RB Leipzig and then FC Magdeburg, who I'm told by Rory are doing some interesting things. But that's like the fan culture that you'd like to get into, isn't it? I like to get into, and which is essentially drinking beer with my mates and just watching the world go by. But it's the fan culture is a big part of that stuff, isn't it? And in English football is, I suppose, it's a different type of thing, isn't it? If you think of actually the crowd behaviour in English football is dictated by what's going on in the game, essentially, where if you're up, you're singing for your team. If you're down, it's likely that you're not going to be singing that much. Or if you're sure that you're really going to lose, you go into the "we'll never die" lament. That's it. Whereas if you go to a European game, it doesn't matter what point of the game, the fans will be singing. They're going through their songbook, and there might be some guy on a mic sort of singing to him and getting them all going. And
I find that really weird and off-putting. I like the idea that they're not reacting to the game. It's just very odd. It's like the two completely separate events happening in the same place at the same time.
But I suppose if you're one of those ultras, you feel that you are performing your bit for the team and getting behind them, and it's like you're part of the collective. I think that's the issue at hand there.
And I know it's very popular. I know we seem to mention Swedish football quite a lot on this podcast, but you get I might say quite a lot. I mean, it's not hundreds, but you get dozens of British people going to Sweden for the Swedish fan culture, which I think a lot go to Germany as well. And Sweden's very similar. It's just a bit cheaper and a bit smaller scale, and it's easier to get in. I can completely see why, if you're a fan of that ultra culture, it's not my my cup of tea, but if you are, then not many geography teachers among that lot. Then I can see why it would be a very attractive proposition.
But if you came to England looking for that experience, you're not going to find it in the Premier League, are you? You're going to have to go lower down the league. That sort of fan aspect.
You would have to go to very specific fixtures, I think, that are basically
go Crystal
impossible.
Palace.
Yeah.
Sorry, producer Tom. Crystal Palace, and maybe you could go with
or like Old Trafford or Anfield in a massive European night that you're not going to get tickets for unless you pay some sort of, you're buying one of the corporates.
What? So you only get in with the hardcore, then? Yeah.
Yeah, you're not on the cup then, by definition.
Exactly. You're not in with because this is arguably a good thing that you can't commercialize that experience in the same way. And like obviously, we've discussed in the pod before, like football has gone down this route where it's almost kind of gradually diluting its own unique selling point, or at least the unique selling point in terms of atmosphere. But
it's in English football. I mean, I'm going to Fulham at the weekend, and they're opening this new stand, which is going to be which they're very excited about. But part of the stands, the reason for building it is to introduce the corporate element to football, to Fulham, to increase their corporate take. I don't know the price of the tickets so far, but we'll find out the weekend. But it feels that the bit that attracted the world to Premier League in the first place, that fervence, is being sold off, doesn't it?
But I think that broader point of, and it's a real dilemma that I don't know how football resolves, that the observation of the thing that makes it attractive dilutes the thing that makes it attractive. So I remember going to Barca, when would it have been? 2008, maybe 2009, and there was a presidential election going on, and they were handing out flyers, and one of the flyers said, "Turistas no socios sí," that they, Barca, nearly 20 years ago, they were annoyed by the number of tourists they had, which they felt diluted the atmosphere. But of course, the tourists are going precisely to see that atmosphere, which they then end up destroying. Which is I don't know how you get around that paradox.
Parallels with the debate about tourism in a lot of Mediterranean countries now.
Yeah, sure. And I suppose, ultimately, if you sell off that aspect of things, things become a little bit naff, don't they? Or become so high premium that the cool that you can't even get in. But I suppose actually we might live in an era where high premium is where you want to be. I mean, like, if we live in this Instagram world, which is all very showy, you want to be shown in the exec suite at Fulham or whatever. You want to be shown drinking champagne or whatever. It's not a world that I would inhabit, but maybe that's the hip new world that's out there. And maybe it's over for the likes of Rayo Vallecano. I don't know, but it's the football hipster thing. Well, it exists. I think it's fair to say, but it's difficult to define in its own way.
Who are hipsters watching now? Like, if you're, I don't know, if you're a up and coming hipster, who's where are you going to watch it? What's your league of choice?
You're probably correct, Jonathan. And if you like Swedish league or something like that for
well, in relation to the Warlock point, do the lower leagues come back round?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I mean, attendance in lower leagues are extraordinary, and this is, I think, an underappreciated part of modern football.
It's on that, exactly. I was actually at the EFL Awards last week. It was the day Liverpool got won the title. Warnock was actually given a Lifetime Achievement Award. His speech was great. It was funny to discuss some of this. But there was also that sense as well, even from a media perspective, given this is somewhat we're here to talk about, it was kind of like a vision into what the job must have been 20, 30 years ago, because you've got that like proximity to the people you cover, and they're willingly chatting, and it's kind of just, and essentially like a lot of players are there enjoying their night in a way that's basically absolutely impossible at Premier League level now. And he was that kind of, and like I've gone to a few of these events now, and it's actually becoming more striking. The further we go down this road in terms of like the Premier League as Super League.
I think that probably puts our discussion to an end, and a typical Miguel Delaney note.
Anyway, chin up.
Chin up, everybody. We should actually say thank you, of course, to Ricardo for that email, which was great, which is fantastic.
And producer Tom
and producer Tom, yeah, and well, also to say to Ricardo, keep spreading the word in Mexico. Maybe some of us will see you next year at the World Cup. If that's another discussion. Of course. Let's get some more emails in. That's where Ricardo got hold of us at Libero Podcast 0. That's one word at gmail.com.
The digit 0. We should stress that.
Yes, the digit 0. So Libero Podcast 0 at gmail.com. And thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, producer Tom. And we'll be back soon.